In every grand house, in every powerful family, there are shadows. Not the kind that come from a dying light, but the human kind. The people who move through the halls completely unseen, their presence as common and as overlooked as the dust floating in a sunbeam. They're the keepers of secrets, the silent observers of every victory and every disaster. This is a story about one of those shadows, a boy named Husein. It's a story that reminds us that real worth isn't measured in gold or status, but in the quiet strength of the human heart. And it's a lesson as old as time. The hand you push away today might be the one you're begging for tomorrow. They said the Adebayo family's grand estate was blessed by fortune itself. Its walls were built with money, and its gates were guarded by pride. But what they never realized was that their greatest treasure wasn't locked away in their vaults or hidden in their silk-filled wardrobes. It was the boy who swept their floors, the one they never bothered to see, the one they laughed at. And in the end, when fortune finally turned its back and their perfect, gilded world began to crumble, it was this boy, Husein, who would teach them the devastating difference between price and value. The Adebayo estate was its own little world, a sprawling masterpiece of whitewashed walls and terracotta tiles that baked under a relentless sun. It was a place of impossible green lawns and fountains that whispered secrets to the wind. Inside, the rooms were so massive they seemed to have their own weather. At the center of it all was Chief Adebayo, a man whose presence felt as heavy as the gold rings on his fingers. He was a merchant, and a powerful one at that. He saw the entire world as a ledger of profit and loss. His voice, a low rumble, could make grown men tremble. He didn't move through his home like a husband or a father, but like a king surveying his kingdom. His wife, Adebayo, was carved from the same hard wood. She draped herself in vibrant, expensive fabrics, her head ties reaching for the sky as if to announce her own divinity. Her laugh was sharp, rare, and usually aimed at someone she thought was beneath her. To her, the world was a stage, and she was its eternal, flawless star. Their children? Well, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Jide, the eldest son, was quickly growing into his father's cruelty. He had all the swagger, but none of the substance. He spent his days lounging, demanding, and finding new ways to exercise his petty power over the staff. He was the lead voice in the chorus of insults that followed Husein down the halls. And then there was Amara, the daughter. In her, the family's harsh lines seemed to soften. She was quiet where they were loud, gentle where they were rough. She moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes often looking down, as if she were embarrassed by the sheer volume of her family's existence. She saw the casual cruelty, the thoughtless insults, but what could she do? She was a tiny sapling in a forest of ancient, unbending trees. Her voice was just too small to be heard. Into this world walked Husein, every single morning, before the sun had even thought about rising. He was 16, but the weight he carried in his soul made him seem much older. He came from a nearby village of red earth and thatched roofs, a world away from the estate's marble floors. He was an orphan, raised by a grandmother whose hands were as wrinkled as old paper, but whose mind was a library of ancient knowledge. She'd taught him the language of the earth, the names of secret herbs that grew in the shade of the baobab tree, the meaning of the clouds that gathered over the hills. This was Husein's inheritance, a kind of wealth the Adebayos couldn't possibly understand. But inside their walls, it meant nothing. Here, he was just the boy. His life was an endless cycle of chores that started in darkness and ended in pure exhaustion. Sweeping courtyards, polishing silver until it gleamed, fetching water, tending fires, running errands. He was just a pair of hands, a pair of feet, a function. His name was a convenience they often forgot. More often, he was summoned with a sharp clap or a dismissive, "You, boy." The scorn was constant. It was in the way Mrs. Adebayo would inspect a polished pot, holding it up to find an imaginary flaw, her lip curling in disdain. "Is this really the best you can do?" she'd sneer. My grandmother's blind goat could have done a better job. It was in the way Chief Adebayo would walk right past him, his great flowing robe brushing Husein aside like a piece of furniture, never once making eye contact. To the chief, Husein was invisible. Jide's cruelty was more personal. He made a game of it. He'd accidentally stick his leg out as Husein passed with a heavy tray, sending food crashing to the floor. Then came the braying laughter. Clumsy fool. Can't you even walk straight? Father, this is the boy you pay to serve us? He only serves to entertain me. Husein would just kneel, his face a perfect mask of neutrality, and clean up the mess, feeling his dignity shatter with every piece of broken pottery. So he learned to be silent, to make himself smaller, to disappear into the corners of the great house. But in his silence he watched. And he learned. He knew the chief's temper was worst after a bad day at the market. He knew Mrs. Adebayo's vanity was her greatest weakness. He knew Jide's bullying was just a cover for how insecure he really was. And he saw Amara's quiet sadness. He saw her leaving a small piece of fruit for him on a windowsill, an unspoken act of kindness that felt like a sip of cool water in a desert of contempt. His only refuge was a small, forgotten patch of dirt behind the kitchens. It was choked with weeds. No one ever bothered with it. Here, Husein tended to a secret garden. Using seeds from his grandmother, he grew herbs for the kitchen, but also others, the ones from his grandmother's lessons. There was bitter leaf to soothe a fever, lemongrass to calm a stomach, and a slender, purple-flowered vine she called Serpent's Kiss. She'd warned him about that one. It was a plant of great power, a cure for a rare poison, but deadly in the wrong hands. It was a secret he kept buried deep, both in the earth and in his heart. This little patch of green was his kingdom, the only place he wasn't just the boy. He was a keeper of ancient wisdom, a strength they couldn't see and therefore didn't believe existed. The change came quietly at first, like the turning of a distant tide. It began with a whisper of sickness that clung to the rich air of the estate like a fog. The first to fall was Jide. One morning, the boy who was always buzzing with energy couldn't even get out of bed. His skin was pale and clammy. He complained of a fire in his joints and a pounding in his head so loud that even the thick walls of his room couldn't block it out. Mrs. Adebayo brushed it off as a simple fever. He spends too much time lounging in the sun, she declared, brewing a pot of expensive imported tea. But the tea did nothing. By evening, Jide was delirious, muttering nonsense, his eyes wide with a fear he couldn't name. That's when panic, a guest rarely invited into the Adebayo home, started to creep in. The next morning, it was Mrs. Adebayo herself. She collapsed in the middle of scolding a servant, her hand flying to her head as a sharp pain shot through her. She was carried to her bed, her vibrant, commanding personality shrinking into a series of weak moans. Same symptoms: burning fever, aching bones, a chilling sweat. Now real fear gripped the house. Chief Adebayo, a man who commanded fortunes, was completely powerless. He bellowed orders that echoed through the suddenly silent halls. He summoned the city's most famous doctor, a man known for treating the rich. The doctor arrived, diagnosed them with some nonsense about imbalances, prescribed a foul-smelling potion, and collected a fat bag of coins. Husein watched it all from the shadows. He saw the doctor's confident act, but he also saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Husein recognized the smell of the medicine. It was a common remedy, totally useless against a real sickness. He'd seen this before, not with his eyes, but through his grandmother's stories. She had spoken of a rare illness, the gray sleep, caused by the bite of a small moth that nested in dark, damp places. The bite itself was painless, leaving only a tiny gray mark, easily missed. But the sickness it carried was slow, creeping, and always fatal. The doctor's medicine failed. Jide and his mother only got weaker. And then the inevitable happened. Chief Adebayo, the Titan, stumbled. He woke up with the same fire in his joints, the same cold dread in his bones. The empire had lost its emperor. The house plunged into chaos. The servants whispered in frightened groups, and many just fled, terrified the curse would take them next. Only a few loyal, older servants remained, along with Husein and a terrified Amara. Amara was the only one left untouched. She ran herself ragged trying to care for her family, her gentle nature completely overwhelmed by the task. She was the one who found the tiny, gray mark on her father's ankle, just like the ones on her mother and brother. She showed it to the doctor, who just peered at it, confused. An insect bite, he declared, nothing more. But Husein knew better. From the doorway, holding a fresh basin of water, he saw the mark clearly. It was exactly what his grandmother had described. He looked around the chief's grand bedroom, at the heavy, damp tapestries hanging on the walls. The perfect home for the gray sleep moth. A chill ran down his spine. He knew what this was. And more importantly, he knew the cure. His mind flashed to his secret garden, to that slender, purple-flowered vine. Serpent's kiss. His grandmother's words echoed in his head. The root can wake a person from the gray sleep, but the preparation must be perfect. One mistake, and the cure becomes a faster poison. It is knowledge to be guarded. Well, all other hope was now lost. The great doctor had finally given up. "I've done all I can," he announced, avoiding Amara's desperate eyes. "It is in God's hands now." He packed his bag and left, leaving behind the smell of failure and the heavy silence of death. Husein stood in the hall, his heart at war with itself. A part of him felt a grim satisfaction. They had mocked him, treated him like dirt. Why should he save them? He could just walk away, go back to his village, and leave them to their fate. Who would ever know? He could be free. But then he thought of Amara, her face streaked with tears. He remembered her small kindnesses, the fruit on the windowsill, the quiet smiles. She didn't deserve this. And as he looked at the helpless figures in their beds, he didn't see the chief or his arrogant wife and son. He just saw 3 people on the edge of death. His grandmother didn't teach him the secrets of the earth for revenge. She taught him to preserve life. It was a sacred duty. This knowledge wasn't a weapon. It was a gift. The decision became crystal clear. He would not let them die. The boy they all laughed at was now the only thing standing between the mighty Adebayo family and the grave. With his mind made up, Husein took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. He walked to the master bedroom, where Amara sat slumped in a chair, her face buried in her hands. The air was thick with sickness and despair. He cleared his throat. "Miss Amara," he said, his voice quiet but steady. She looked up, her eyes red and hollow, surprised to see him. "Husein, what is it?" "I think I know what this sickness is," he said carefully. "And I think I know of a cure." Amara just stared. "You?" But the doctor, the most learned man in the city, he couldn't do anything. "His knowledge comes from books," Husein said, a new confidence rising in him. "Mine comes from the earth, passed down from my grandmother. This isn't a common sickness. It's called the gray sleep. It comes from the bite of an insect." He pointed to the heavy, damp tapestry on the wall. "One that lives in places like that." He knelt and pointed to the faint gray mark on Chief Adebayo's ankle. "And this is its sign." Amara's eyes widened. She'd seen the marks, but thought they were nothing. A tiny sliver of hope cut through her despair. "A cure? Are you sure?" "The cure isn't simple," Husein said gravely. "The ingredients are rare. They only grow in the sunken grove, deep in the forest. It's a dangerous place. But if the remedy is made correctly, it can work." Desperation is a powerful thing. With no other options, Amara clung to this last, unbelievable chance. "The sunken grove? I've heard the hunters talk about it. They say it's full of quicksand and snakes." "It is," Husein said. "But I have to go. We're running out of time." He didn't wait for an answer. He went to the kitchen and packed a small bag with a water skin, some dried meat, and the sharpest knife he could find. As he was leaving, Amara met him at the back door and pressed a small, heavy pouch into his hand. "Gold," she whispered. "For your troubles." Husein looked at the pouch, then at her face. He gently pushed her hand back. "This isn't for gold, Miss Amara. Keep it. You'll need it for the servants who stayed." And with that, he turned and vanished into the pre-dawn darkness. The journey to the sunken grove tested him to his limits. The forest canopy was so thick, the daylight was just a dim, green twilight. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. But Husein moved with a purpose he'd never felt before, his senses on fire. His grandmother's lessons were his map and his shield. He recognized the call of a hornbill and knew water was near. He saw the bent twigs that meant a wild boar had passed and knew to stay clear. The entrance to the grove was a foul-smelling swamp. The ground looked solid, but it was just a crust over thick, hungry mud. Husein remembered his grandmother's advice. Where the white-plumed spider spins its web, the ground is firm. He spent an hour carefully picking his way across, his feet landing on roots and patches of earth marked by the spider's silver threads. Inside the grove, it was like another world, eerily silent, with ancient trees dripping moss and the ground carpeted in strange, glowing fungi. This was where the serpent's kiss vine grew, high up, clinging to the trunk of a giant ironwood tree. Finding it was the easy part. Reaching it was another story. The trunk was slick with moss and too wide to climb. Husein had to fashion a hook from a branch and a tough vine. He threw it again and again, his arms aching, until it finally caught. Then he began the slow, brutal climb. Halfway up, his hand slipped. He dangled, his heart hammering against his ribs. He gritted his teeth, found a new hold, and pulled himself up, his muscles screaming. As he neared the vine, a flash of movement caught his eye. A viper, coiled on the very branch he needed to reach, its head raised, its tongue tasting the air. Cold fear almost paralyzed him. But then another lesson surfaced. The serpent fears the scent of the bitter ash leaf. He'd instinctively plucked a few earlier and tucked them in his shirt. Slowly, he pulled one out, crushed it, and waved his hand toward the snake. The viper hissed, recoiled from the sharp smell, and slithered away. Breathing a sigh of relief, Husein finally reached the serpent's kiss. He carefully dug out a piece of its root with his knife and wrapped it in a damp cloth. The journey back was just as dangerous, but he finally arrived at the estate as the sun was setting, bruised, scratched, and exhausted, but holding the cure in his hands. Without pausing to rest, Husein walked straight to the deserted kitchens. Amara, who had been watching the gate, rushed to meet him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You're back," she breathed. "You have it." Husein just nodded, unwrapping the precious root. This was the most critical part. He set to work, his movements precise and focused. He washed the root, scraped the bark, and began to grind it on a clean stone, just as his grandmother had taught him. He added a few drops of water to make a thick, dark paste. Then he added a pinch of another herb from his garden to balance the root's power, and a single flower petal to guide its healing. He divided the paste into 3 small portions, dissolved each in warm water, and carried the 3 cups to the master bedroom. Amara followed, her heart pounding. They started with Jide. Propping up his head, Husein gently poured the liquid into his mouth, a little at a time. They did the same for Mrs. Adebayo, and then for the chief. And then there was nothing to do but wait. That night was the longest in the estate's history. Husein and Amara sat in a silent vigil, watching and listening to the shallow breathing of the 3 figures in the beds. The hours crawled by. For a long time, nothing changed. Amara's hope began to fade. She looked at Husein, her eyes full of questions. He just met her gaze with a calm, steady look that said patience. Just before dawn, it happened. Jide stirred. A deep cough rattled his chest. His eyes fluttered open. They were no longer delirious, but clear and confused. He looked at Amara, then at Husein. "What happened?" he rasped. A sob of relief escaped Amara's lips. Soon after, her mother began to stir, the feverish color draining from her face. Finally, Chief Adebayo let out a deep groan. He slowly sat up, looking at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. The gray sleep was broken. Over the next few days, as their strength returned, the reality of what happened sank in. The powerful Adebayo family, with all their money, had been brought to their knees by a moth. And they had been saved, not by a famous doctor, but by their houseboy. The boy they had mocked. The boy they had never truly seen. The house changed. The air, once thick with arrogance, was now filled with a heavy, unspoken shame. Jide couldn't even look Husein in the eye. One afternoon, as Husein brought him broth, Jide finally spoke, his voice a whisper. "Husein, I am sorry." It was probably the first apology he'd ever offered in his life. Mrs. Adebayo's change was the most striking. Her sharp, critical voice was gone. She would just watch Husein work, her face a mix of gratitude and deep regret. The superior identity she'd built for herself had crumbled. But the biggest change was in Chief Adebayo. One evening, when he was well enough to sit in his chair, he summoned Husein. Amara stood nearby, smiling proudly. The chief looked at Husein, really looked at him, for the very first time. He didn't see a servant. He saw a young man of incredible strength and integrity. "Boy, no," the chief corrected himself, his voice thick with emotion. "Husein, I can never repay you. You saved my family. You saved me. I've spent my life counting coins, measuring worth in gold. And I was a blind fool." He pointed to a heavy chest at his feet. "This is yours. More gold than you could spend in a lifetime. A house, land, anything you want. You are no longer a servant here. You will be like a son to me." Husein listened calmly. He looked at the gold, then at the family he had saved. He thought of his grandmother, his garden, and her lessons. He knew what he wanted. "Thank you, Chief Adebayo," Husein said, his voice firm but respectful. "Your gratitude is all the reward I need. I don't want the gold or the house. Wealth can be a heavy burden." He paused. "But I will ask for one thing. I want to learn. I want to study the great books of medicine, to combine my grandmother's knowledge with the knowledge of the wider world, so I can help others. I only ask that you pay for my education." A stunned silence filled the room. Chief Adebayo stared, his eyes wide with disbelief, then with a profound, newfound respect. He had offered the boy riches, and the boy had asked for wisdom. In that moment, the chief finally understood. The boy standing before him was wealthier than he had ever been. The chief slowly rose to his feet and bowed his head slightly to Husein, a gesture of respect he hadn't shown anyone in years. "It will be done," he said, his voice humbled. "You have taught this old man a lesson I will never forget." And from that day on, Husein was no longer the houseboy. He was Husein, the scholar and the healer. Chief Adebayo kept his word, and Husein became one of the most learned healers in the entire land, his name spoken with respect. He never forgot where he came from, and he treated every single patient, rich or poor, with the same dignity and compassion. The Adebayo family was forever changed. Their laughter was softer, their words kinder. They had been humbled, and in that humility, they found a better version of themselves. The story of Husein became a local legend, a tale told around fires, reminding everyone that the people we overlook so easily often hold the very strength we need. It shows that real power lies in quiet knowledge, in the courage of a humble heart, and in the simple truth that a person's real value has nothing to do with their station in life, but everything to do with the character they choose to build. The world is full of people whose true value is hidden in plain sight. If this story reminded you that everyone has a secret strength waiting to be discovered, please like this video and subscribe for more stories that uncover the hero within. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us about a time someone completely surprised you with a hidden talent or an unexpected act of kindness. Thanks for watching.